What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer from Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at the Week 14 main slate of the NFL season. 10 games for us to go through on DraftKings, FanDuel, and Yahoo. And I feel like this is the deja vu slate, okay? Last week, favorite play on the slate was Amon-Ra St. Brown. This week, my favorite play on the slate is also Amon-Ra St. Brown. 27 receptions, 312 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns on 29 targets over the last 3 weeks. Wide receiver 1 for the Detroit Lions, who are favored in the highest betting market total game of the weekend against the Minnesota Vikings at home. Once again, Amon-Ra St. Brown, best play I think you should be focusing on for all lineup types here in Week 14. Normal agenda of the show time. We have a couple of gigantic favorites on this slate. The first of which is the Dallas Cowboys. Dallas Cowboys are favored by 18 right now against the Houston Texans. Good running matchup, but the problem here, of course, is we have the 1A, 1B situation with Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. So looking at the Cowboys backfield, I do think you will see the field focus more on Tony Pollard. He has been the better fantasy producer over the last few weeks. But the thing to be leery of here with Pollard is that Ezekiel Elliott tends to play more snaps and see more opportunities on the ground. And this spread may lend itself to the type of game plan where Ezekiel Elliott may get more usage than Tony Pollard if the Cowboys truly run away with this. So pay attention to projected ownership on this one. As of right now, Pollard is projecting as one of the 3 most popular running backs on this slate, so I do think we have to consider using Tony Pollard in all lineup types. Next biggest favorite on the slate is the Buffalo Bills at home against the New York Jets, favored by 10. And last week, we saw James Cook leapfrog Devin Singletary for opportunities, 14 carries, 6 targets in the passing game, and we got some positive commentary out of Bills head coach Sean McDermott after the game, saying that he really liked what he saw out of the usage in his backfield. To me, that kind of suggests that we see at a minimum this split between James Cook and Devin Singletary continue, and it's hard not to be interested in Cook at his price tag of $4,600 here on DraftKings and just $6,100 over on FanDuel. Don't think the field is going to be playing Cook all that heavily this week unless something drastic news-wise changes or breaks. So I think he's just high risk only, but Cook is one of my favorite plays on this slate as well here in Week 14. The next biggest favorite, we have the Kansas City Chiefs favored by 8.5 in their date with the Denver Broncos, one of the 3 games in the 4 p.m. window on this slate. Chiefs running back Isaiah Pacheco has seen over 60% of team rushes in recent weeks, and he has a slightly below average matchup in the running game that he can take advantage of here against the Broncos in what should be a favorable game script for the Chiefs. Miles Sanders and the Philadelphia Eagles are favored by a touchdown in their matchup this week. Sanders on the road against the Giants, leading this backfield in carries, about 50% of team carries because of the large role in the running game that Jalen Hurts has at the quarterback position. But Sanders, the best running back play from the Eagles nonetheless, just $6,200 here on DraftKings. The Giants are a well below average rush defense this week, so that'll benefit Hurts as well as Sanders. Sanders projects to be a little more popular on FanDuel than DraftKings this week. Joe Mixon and the Cincinnati Bengals host the Deshaun Watson-led Cleveland Browns in the Battle of Ohio this week. Last week, we were unsure if Joe Mixon was going to play because he had not cleared the concussion protocol. This week, he not only cleared the concussion protocol, but he fully participated in all of the Bengals practices, and now he gets to run against a Browns defense that is the second worst Football Outsiders DVOA run defense on the season. Really good matchup for Mixon at just $6,900 here on DraftKings over on FanDuel, where he's going to be the most popular running back play on the slate. So I do think you want Mixon in some of your builds this week, and I will be slotting him into my low-risk build, especially given the context and the matchup here. Other popular plays. Talked a little bit about Tony Pollard already because the Cowboys are favored by 1 billion points. We have DeAndre Swift with the Detroit Lions. Swift has seen his touches increase and his snaps increase to the detriment of teammate Jamal Williams and his insane touchdown rate this year. So Swift is actually someone the field is going to be focusing on in this high total game where he's just $5,800 here on DraftKings, $7,200 over on FanDuel, unless we get a couple of changes. But we do like his opportunities this week, particularly in the passing game against the Minnesota Vikings, where the Vikings are below average pass defense against the running back specifically. And now we're starting to see how we get a lot of exposure to this high total game between the Vikings and the Lions here, with a lot of my lineup spots still to go, right? So like DeAndre Swift is a low risk play. Derrick Henry with the Tennessee Titans is going to be on the fringe of the top 3, top 4 most popular running backs, depending on how ownership and injury news shakes out. But it's basically an average matchup against the Jaguars' run defense for Derrick Henry, and we all know who Derrick Henry is, right? So Henry's someone else that people are looking at on this 10-game slate here in Week 14. The biggest injury situation at the running back position that is worth monitoring is the Seattle Seahawks. You can go ahead and assume that it's like a 99.9% probability that both Walker and Dallas are not going to play, which means Travis Homer, who did get some full practices in at the end of the weekend, has been cleared. He's most likely to lead this backfield in touches. He's very cheap this week, but we can't rule out Tony Jones Jr., the former Saint, who's been playing with the Seahawks for the last few weeks, from getting a few opportunities as well. And he's $4,800 here on DraftKings. Looking at Seattle running backs here on FanDuel, Travis Homer, Tony Jones, both below $6,000 here on FanDuel as well, which certainly opens up the board quite a bit. In fact, early Saturday morning model check here at the running back position, Travis Homer is the number 1 ranked running back in the model right now. We're going ahead and assuming, as I just told you, Walker and Dallas are going to be out, and that Homer and Jones will be the guys that are toting the rock for the Seahawks against the Carolina Panthers. And we have taken the leap of faith and assumed that Homer is by far the better play of the two. So I feel like this is the guy that Pete Carroll will trust in the running game in this matchup with the Carolina Panthers, who are a below average rush defense and a below average pass defense against the running backs. If Homer ends up being confirmed as the starter by Sunday afternoon, he will probably supplant guys like DeAndre Swift and, as you saw in our model, our favorite high-risk play as of last night, Donta Foreman, as our new favorite high-risk play. So this is the most important injury situation on this slate, and this is one where you're going to want to keep an eye on our daily plug that is updated throughout the weekend for the slate. We're going to want to play Homer pretty heavily if we can get some confirmation that he's going to start, but we don't know that yet. So this is something that we're going to have to take right up until about 1 p.m. on Sunday. So I hope that all makes sense. Given the information that we have right now and all the running backs that I just went over for you, looking at projected ownership, it does feel like the low-risk group is something like this today. Mixon, Pollard, and Swift are the 3 most popular running backs here on DraftKings and on FanDuel. Pollard, Mixon, and Swift also leaves you plenty of salary to finish off the rest of your low-risk lineup. High totals. How are the betting markets looking this week? The Minnesota Vikings are visiting the Lions. The total is 52 points according to the odds makers, and this is the only game with a total above 47. The next closest game to it is Cincinnati and Cleveland at 46.5. Not a ton of game environments to get excited about this week. Also, with the Cowboys, the Bills, the Chiefs, and the Eagles all favored by a touchdown or more, those are some game environments where we're not necessarily fully interested in stacking both sides of the game. So if you like the Cowboys, the Bills, the Chiefs, the Eagles this week, a 2-0 or a 3-0 stack with your favorite quarterback out of that group. My favorite game to stack, I'm going to go right with the field and go with Minnesota and Detroit. And the biggest reason, just looking at Detroit's usage in recent weeks, is obviously we've already got Swift and Brown here as low-risk viable, but if you look at the wide receiver usage, DJ Chark has been playing a ton of snaps, running a ton of routes over the last 2 weeks since coming back from his injury. Minimum 5 targets last 2 weeks out, right? So just $4,300 here on DraftKings. I think he's the best secondary play in high-risk lineups with the Lions. And then Jared Goff at the quarterback position, switching back to low-risk lineups for a second, going to be the most popular quarterback play on this slate at just $5,600. So your most popular low-risk build this week is already lending itself to a game stack of this game environment. So that's something to keep in mind. In this particular build for high risk, I would consider playing Chark and not playing Swift, and using obviously the most obvious bring back on this game from the Vikings, if you go with the Lions side, is Justin Jefferson. Pretty cost prohibitive. You can get away with Dalvin Cook and hope the production comes on the ground for the Vikings. Cook is a good high-risk play because he's not one of the more popular running backs on the slate, but he does rank inside the top 10 in our model this week. And then also we have the secondary players on the Vikings to consider. Adam Thielen, just $4,900 here at wide receiver. And obviously TJ Hawkinson, the former Detroit Lion at tight end, just $5,100. interesting way to attack this game in high risk. When we start to include our defenses in our builds, a team that's going to be popular this week is the Steelers because they're catching a backup quarterback in Tyler Huntley from the Ravens. You see we got 5,400 per player remaining to finish off a high risk lineup that's built around some of the more popular low risk plays in the week. It's extremely easy to just stack the best game environment on the slate. So if you're the type of player that builds one lineup and enters a few high-risk contests, I do think you want to focus on building around this Lions and Vikings game. Getting back to the low-risk build, the Steelers here are the most popular defense on this slate in their matchup with Tyler Huntley. Lamar Jackson, unfortunately, suffered a knee injury last week. They're being very cautious with bringing him back in Baltimore, so there'll be a backup under center for the Ravens, and the Steelers are actually favored in this game at home against the Ravens. When the salaries came out for this slate, I don't think they fully accounted for Pittsburgh being the better side here, and that's how we get a $2,800 defense at home that's favored. That ends up being the most popular defense on the slate. So just use them in low-risk lineups and in some small field high-risk lineups as well. I think they probably lend themselves to some pretty creative builds if you just eat the chalk here a little bit at the defense position. Something to keep in mind. Wide receivers that are usable in low-risk contests. Looking at projected ownership, as we always do. No surprise. Justin Jefferson with the Vikings comes in right behind Amon-Ra St. Brown, is extremely popular this week. CeeDee Lamb with the Cowboys, going to be popular just like Tony Pollard, 17% DraftKings, 16% FanDuel, and looks like he's going to be the most popular wide receiver over on Yahoo, where he's priced way too low, just $24 on their scale. But Garrett Wilson, once again, with the New York Jets at 17% ownership, priced at just $5,900, is probably the next best wide receiver to use in a low-risk lineup in this matchup with the Buffalo Bills, where the Jets almost certainly are going to be throwing all game long, and when they do that, he's the guy they throw to. 15 targets last week against the Minnesota Vikings in a very similar spot where the Jets were underdogs and we're chasing points. We've seen it before. We're going to see it again. We're at the point of the season where these teams continue to do what they've shown us they do all year long. Garrett Wilson, still too cheap in DFS. Going to be a wide receiver that the field plays heavily, so just lean into that and use Garrett Wilson. Denver's Greg Dulcich has been leading the team in targets in recent weeks, and he'll probably continue to do so because Courtland Sutton is not going to play at the wide receiver position. $3,400 here on DraftKings. Very cheap over on FanDuel as well. By far the most popular play at the position, so we can lean into that in low risk and play him. $54.50 per player remaining to finish off our lineup. And I think we need a cheap wide receiver to get to our third low risk running back, which would be DeAndre Swift in the low risk build. $5,100 per player remaining on a DraftKings low risk lineup. And looking at projected ownership, you see this is where someone like Adam Thielen might get used. Just keep on the news through Sunday, because the thing that'll blow up this low risk build entirely is if the Seattle Seahawks tell us Travis Homer is starting. He'll be the guy you'll want to throw in here as your third running back, and now you'll have 59 per player remaining for your one slot. So that's kind of where this low risk slate is going to shake out by Sunday afternoon. Getting back to high risk, things that we can do that aren't stacking the Vikings and the Lions on this slate. The Bengals and the Browns are probably the next best game environment, given the modest, what I would call an average total, about 46.5, but on this slate it's above average. Joe Burrow, one of the more popular quarterbacks on this slate. Jamar Chase, right back to his wide receiver one role. We saw him get 8 targets last week in the win over the Kansas City Chiefs, so we're going to want to include him. No Hayden Hurst at the tight end position, which is going to boost the usage for Higgins and Boyd. I don't think I'm super interested in Wilcox, Devin Asiasi in this spot. I don't think that they'll get used all that much by Burrow, but if you're looking for an extremely cheap option in a double stack, these guys are there. I think I would just focus on Higgins or Boyd. I will lean Boyd getting more work with Hurst out as one of the 3 best pass catchers in this offense. On the Browns side, you can bring back with Nick Chubb. You can bring back with Amari Cooper, although he is questionable with a hip injury that popped up late in the week. So Cooper would be someone that's usable as a bring back. If we get news that he is out, then we can do some more creative things like use Donovan Peoples-Jones, who's already running a lot of routes, or David Njoku, who has already been confirmed back here in Week 14 for the Browns, the tight end position, and sees about 20% of the targets per game when he is active. A lot of salary left to build out the rest of your lineup here. You can use popular players that we've talked about already in this video to round out the rest of your lineup. So someone like DeAndre Swift at the running back position, someone like Tony Pollard at the running back position. And as you see, 2 slots left, 54.50 per player remaining. One of the other things I like doing on this slate is stacking the Buffalo Bills. It's one of my favorite high-risk moves. And although the Bills are favored by 10, Garrett Wilson is still viable as a bringback because he's going to be extremely popular this week. So I would use him in a Bills stack with Josh Allen. We've got Stephon Diggs, obviously, that everyone will want to use. But there is Gabriel Davis, who is on our underperforming wide receiver list this week, and you can see why a little bit just by looking at last week's usage. 7 targets against the New England Patriots, just 2 receptions for 15 yards. Even though the touchdown was in there, this day should have been a lot better for Gabe Davis based off of how he was targeted. And he's one of the better wide receivers that we want to target in high-risk lineups because of this underperforming wide receiver list. We see that Deontay Johnson leads the pack on our underperforming wide receiver list in the model at OccupyFantasy.com. Gabe Davis down here at the bottom, someone to consider. These are the guys that we like using as one-off plays at the wide receiver position around our game stacks in high-risk lineups. It has proven to be a profitable strategy. We go over that in full detail in the free NFL strategy guide on our website, OccupyFantasy.com, which I encourage you to read through if you are new to our content. So Gabe Davis, one of my favorite ways to double stack Josh Allen. 48.50 per player remaining might make this a little difficult, but when you consider that we can start to slot in some popular plays like Dulcich, and we may have cheap plays at the running back position like Travis Homer available, you can see that there may be a way to get this done with a cheap wide receiver and another popular running back, for example. So I do think this is an extremely viable approach in Week 14 contests here on DraftKings. Getting back to the bread and butter of Week 14, I do think we want to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown in most lineup types. Definitely low risk, definitely a high risk lineup where you're stacking the Lions and the Vikings. And you may even be able to use him as a one-off in some other type of high risk builds that you are considering. At the running back position, we have Joe Mixon as the most popular running back play on the slate. Probably want to include him as well. We've got the Pittsburgh Steelers as the most popular defense. Jared Goff as the most popular quarterback at just $5,600. Garrett Wilson, still too cheap as the wide receiver 1 for the New York Jets. Going to want to include Garrett Wilson in some low-risk builds. Wilson, 25% of team targets, 39% of team air yards over the last 3 weeks of play, and still very clearly one of Mike White's favorite targets. Want him in a low-risk build. 52.50 per player remaining here on DraftKings. That's only going to go up when we include Denver's most popular play, Greg Dulcich, with Cortland Sutton missing the game. 58.66 per player remaining. A cheap running back, one way or another. Right now, it does seem like it's Detroit's DeAndre Swift that the field is going to play. But if and when we get confirmation that Seattle's Travis Homer is going to start, then that means he'll probably supplant Swift's ownership at a much cheaper price. And that will give us $6,300 per player remaining to finish up our low-risk lineups. Really straightforward slate, I think, here in Week 14 as far as how most people are going to play it. So just keep that in mind as you get ready for this weekend's content. I'll be live in our Discord over at Occupy Fantasy at 11 a.m. on Sunday morning to go over any last-minute items that we've learned and discovered from inactives. So maybe this Homer situation will be clarified by then, so you'll certainly want to check that out there. But the daily plug over at OccupyFantasy.com, which is already up, goes over all the injury situations on this slate, goes over all of our favorite plays at each position, and that is something that you definitely want to check out if you have not already. Good luck here in Week 14, everybody, and we'll be back to talk to you about Week 15 of the NFL season next week.